1850, City of Atlanta officials purchased 6 acres of land just east of the city for a public burial grounds. We now know this to be Oakland Cemetery, and it is the eternal resting place of former Georgia governors, Atlanta mayors, Confederate soldiers, sports figures, and famous authors. Let's take a closer look at Oakland Cemetery. Oakland Cemetery is divided into sections, and the Confederate soldiers section is marked by the 65-foot obelisk. And at 65 feet tall, for many years this was the tallest structure in Atlanta, and it is made from granite from Stone Mountain. We know that Atlanta was the site of a tremendous battle between Confederate and Union troops as Union General William Sherman marched his way through Georgia toward Savannah on his march to the sea. And in this area, there were many battles, there were many hospitals and places to take care of wounded soldiers. And the city of Atlanta, realizing that it needed to expand Oakland Cemetery, at the beginning of the cemetery it was about 6 acres, and during the Civil War the city purchased additional land to almost 50 acres. This is the burial site of Captain William Allen Fuller. Captain Fuller was captain of a locomotive called the General, and the General was stolen in Kennesaw by a group of Union spies called Andrews Raiders. Captain William Fuller pursued the General on foot, then on a handcart, and then he took the Texas locomotive to track down Andrews Raiders. In 1856, James Williams was the mayor of Atlanta, and he built a residence atop this high ground which later became a part of Oakland Cemetery. From the second story of the house, General John B. Hood, in command of Confederate forces, and members of his staff watched that part of the Battle of Atlanta on July 22, 1864. In the late 1860s, African Americans could buy burial space here at Oakland Cemetery, but by the end of that decade, at the end of the 1870s, Oakland Cemetery was running out of space, and so the remains of African Americans that had been buried in the Slave Square were removed and reburied in what's known as the Slave Pauper Ground. The African American burial ground that you're viewing here at Oakland Cemetery demonstrates racial segregation in America in both life and death. From 1866 until the end of legal segregation of public facilities in Atlanta in 1963, African American burials were restricted to this section, adjacent to land set aside for burials of the poor. Oakland Cemetery not only was segregated and separated by race, it was also separated by faith. And this section of the cemetery is the resting place of Jewish citizens of Atlanta. Six former Georgia governors are buried here at Oakland Cemetery. This is the burial spot of Joseph Emerson Brown. He was governor of our state from 1857 to 1865. This is the burial site of Martha Lumpkin Compton. She was the daughter of Governor Wilson Lumpkin, and in honor of Martha, Atlanta was once named Marthasville. This is the burial site of Maynard H. Jackson, Jr., the first African-American mayor of the city of Atlanta. Maynard Jackson was elected in 1974. 4 years later, in 1978, he ran for re-election and was successful. When that second term ended in 1982, he stepped away from politics, but returned in 1990 and ran for a third time. He was successful, and that third term ended in 1994. Maynard Jackson was born on March 23, 1938. He died of a heart attack on June 23, 2003. The Atlanta airport was renamed Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in his honor. This is the burial plot of the Marsh family, and married to John Robert Marsh was Margaret Mitchell. And Margaret Mitchell is famous for writing the best-selling work of fiction Gone with the Wind. She was born in Atlanta on November 8, 1900, and she died August 16, 1949. And it was a tragic death. She was crossing Peachtree Street with her husband. They were going to see a movie, and an off-duty taxi cab struck her, and she was taken to Grady Hospital. She was in a coma for several days before she died of her injuries. Again, this is the burial plot of the Marsh family, and married to John Robert Marsh was Margaret Mitchell, author of the best-selling novel Gone with the Wind. This is the burial site of Robert Bobby Jones. He was born March 17, 1902, and he died December 18, 1971. Bobby Jones is considered one of the greatest golfers who ever lived. In 1930, he won 4 major championships: the British Amateur, the British Open, the United States Amateur, and the United States Open. In 1933, at the age of 31, he designed the Augusta National Golf Course in Augusta, home of the Masters Tournament.